The Incas had one of the most advanced civilizations in history. They had massive cities, they had extensive road networks and engineering that still amazes us today. When the Spanish arrived, they didn't rely on brute force, but rather they used strategy and alliances to control. In this video, I want to see if we can learn both from the Incas and the Spanish when it comes to getting success on Amazon KDP. Because sometimes getting analogies like that or examples, it can make the knowledge stick better. So I'm in the Andes right now in Peru. I've been to Lima, I've been to Arakipa, and I've been to Kusco. So let's start with Kusco and see what we can learn. Then we'll move on to the other places. So Kusco is the heart of the Inca Empire, or was the heart of the Inca Empire. And in Kusco, we can learn that the Incas, they protected their best assets. So I was up at Machu Picchu, and the guy there, he told me that they covered the trails. So the Spanish, they could never get to Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu was a place where people came to share knowledge, and then they came back to their own cities and they'd learned these new things. So Machu Picchu was a very valuable asset for the Incas. And how can we do the same in our publishing business? How can we protect our best asset? Well, if we take a look at the book, let's say we have a great book, what can we do to make sure that it continues to sell? So I had one book that I published in 2019. It's one of my best books. It's still selling thousands of dollars every single month, but the sales over time had declined. And I hired an Amazon ads expert in October of last year, and he told me that there were several improvements I could make with the ads. So if you're only optimizing the ads, you're reducing the cost, like you're stopping clicks, etc., stopping keywords, and that's over time, that's going to lead to a decline in the performance of the ad. So what he had me do was add, for example, an auto campaign. He tested to target more products, etc., because the market is always changing. There's coming new products into the marketplace, and if you want to keep your ads updated, then keep that in mind as well. So that's one way to protect our best asset. But of course, we can also look at the quality of the book. So now we talked about the marketing, but let's talk about the quality of the book, the content. And one way we can protect the content of the book, or the value, the perceived value of the book, is by analyzing the reviews. So let's say we're getting 1 and 2 or 3-star reviews. Is there a common pattern, or is there something in the book that we can improve? So let's say they complain about the content or the chapters not being organized enough, or maybe it's lacking images or illustrations or something else, or perhaps there's grammatical errors. And these are all things that we can improve in our book. So study the reviews, see what you can improve, and make a second edition. Another thing that you might not think about is the people you work with. So take, for example, the freelancers. Let's say you have a great writer, an A player. What can you do to protect that asset? Because the people you work with, they become your best asset, especially if you've trained them well. So one way is to get into the mind of the freelancer. Think about what is most valuable for them. And most likely, the most valuable thing is not praise, that's good, but what they want is security. They want to know that they can get consistent work from you, so they don't have to look for work elsewhere. They don't have to chase other clients. So that is one way to protect your asset within your team. And of course, praising them, treating them well when it's Christmas, when it's the end of the year. Perhaps give her a small bonus to show your appreciation as well. Let's now move on to the second city, which is Lima, the capital city of Peru. In Lima, we can learn from Francisco Pizarro, the Spanish conquistador, and how he placed this city. So there were a lot of cities next to the coast that had issues with pirates. So he wanted to place this city a little bit more inland, still near the coast, so it was good for trade. But he made it so that it was harder for the enemies to attack. So in essence, it was like he built a wall. He created a higher barrier of entry. And that is something that we can do with our books as well. We can think, okay, how can we make it so that it's not so easy for a competitor to copy our book and get the same results as us, and then our results decrease in the process? For example, if you're doing a basic coloring book, what is stopping someone else from doing a basic coloring book? Or if you're doing basic marketing, what is stopping someone from doing basic marketing as well? So when you're creating the books, I encourage you to think about how you can create a wall. For example, can you use more thinking? Can you use more creativity? Can you use expert knowledge? Or can you find a unique angle or unique method or way to deliver the value, deliver a better experience for the readers? When you do that, it's like you're doing what Francisco Pizarro did when he positioned Lima in this way. You're building a higher barrier of entry that stops the competitors from coming in, and it stops the pirates, it stops the enemies, etc., which was what he wanted with the positioning of Lima. Now, of course, you can also create a higher barrier of entry by building a brand, building an email list, and instead of only having one asset, so one book, you can create a series of books that all feed into each other so that each book leads to the sale of the next book, etc.
Shameless plug break, Driven Publishers Elite is finally open for enrollment again, but it will only stay open for a few more days or until spots fill up. We already have people joining, so I encourage you to check it out, as it's everything I wish I had in my journey in terms of self-publishing education, community, and more. Link in the description.
And we could, of course, go into protecting your KDP account and things like that, but that will make this video way too long. So let's move on to the third city, which is Arakipa. Now, Arakipa is an interesting city because the Spanish didn't approach it the same way that they approached Kusco, where they went more with brute force in Kusco. So when you ask a Peruvian, what do you think about the Spanish people? Depending on the city, you will get different responses. And the reason for this is because of the way the Spanish people approached the taking of control of that city. So in Kusco, it was more brute force, but in Arakipa, they more wanted to blend with the natives. And that is evident when you go into the churches of Arakipa. So for example, in the Inca religion, the sun is a god. And that is one thing you will see in a church in Arakipa. When you walk in there, you will see the sun in the center. And you will also see other native elements that made it so that when the natives came into the church, which was a Catholic church, they were more open to taking in the teachings because they saw something familiar. So instead of trying to force the beliefs, force their values onto the natives, the Spanish in Arakipa, they wanted to more respect what was already there, but introduce something that they thought was better, and of course it was also unique from what was already out there. So I think you're seeing where I'm going with this. If you are publishing a book, you don't want to try to force your beliefs, force your values, or what you think is good onto the marketplace. You want to study the market. You want to realize that there are already people there and they're expecting certain experiences, and you want to align with that. But of course, you don't want to create something that is already out there, because that's not the best strategy. And I made many videos of that you can watch to see how the problems I see currently in the Amazon KDP space, that people are simply copying and doing what everyone else is doing. And that is usually not a good strategy for success. So study what works, respect what works, but add your own uniqueness to it. Add what you think will make your book better than the existing books. Now, of course, you don't want to go extreme and copy what is already out there. That is not a good strategy. So keep that in mind. There's a balance. So you don't want to go too extreme where you create something completely out of touch with the market, and you also don't want to copy. So there's a balance, and that is the sweet spot when you're able to provide something that perhaps the target audience, the people who are buying books in that type of niche, they don't even know that they want it yet. That is the sweet spot. But it is something that they need. It is something that they want. And when you provide something like that, you position your book very well. Okay, so let's move on. We have another lesson from the Spanish and the Incas. And the Spanish and the Incas, when it came to building structures, they used different materials. So for example, for the cement, the Spanish, they used seabird eggs to create the cement, while the Incas, they used cactus juice. But regardless of the material they used, the end result was very much the same, which was a strong structure. So for example, the Incas, they built this structure to withstand earthquakes And it's very fascinating when you hear how they adapted the way they built according to nature, etc. But I'll not go into that. But I think you see where I'm going with this as well. You don't want to over-obsess about the method, the material, the process. You want to focus on the result. And when you focus on the result, you realize that, okay, I don't need to take a black and white approach. I don't need to only do human creation. For example, let's say you're saying, I will only use human writing. I will not use AI for anything, not even generating ideas. And I will not use it to get any inspiration whatsoever. That's one approach. And if you want to go that approach, that works. And then we have the other approach where it's, I will only use AI. I will not use any human elements. Now, of course, those are very extreme sides. And I think that the best approach is when you take the best from this side, AI, for example, and you take the best side from this, the human intelligence, the human creativity, and you mix them together, just like the Spanish did in Arakipa, where they more so blended with the natives. Let's quickly recap. It's starting to rain here. It's very interesting weather here. It's changing very rapidly, just like the Amazon marketplace is changing very rapidly. So we have Kusco, the heart of the Incas. What did we talk about there? We talked about protecting our best assets. We also talked about, no, we didn't talk about studying the weaknesses. So that is one interesting lesson as well, which I forgot. The Spanish, when they came into South America and when they wanted to take over Cusco, they didn't simply go on the attack right away, but rather they studied the weaknesses of the Incas. And they talked with the pre-Incas, they found these trails, they were hungry for knowledge, they wanted to learn what they could do to take over the Incas, not based on their own theories, but based on what's working right there in the Inca terrain, in the South American terrain. Well, that is one interesting lesson that I missed. In essence, that is about studying the weaknesses of the existing books by reading the reviews. So we have Cusco. What can we learn from Cusco? In Cusco, we learned that the Incas, they protected their best assets. They protected Machu Picchu, and we went over ways to do that. And we also talked about how the Spanish, they wanted to find out the weaknesses of the Incas by, for example, uncovering trails, etc., and learning their language. And then we have Lima, and we learned how the city was positioned in a way to make it harder to attack. And that is, of course, that we create a higher barrier of entry so that it's harder for competitors to simply copy our books and get the same results as our results go down. And then we had Arakipa, where we discussed about taking something that's already familiar to the readers, and then we add our own value to it to make the book better or unique, and ideally both. And then lastly, we talked about the way the Incas and the Spanish built and how they focused on the outcome and not the material and the process. One last lesson we can learn is that the Spanish, as they wanted to conquer the South American continent, they didn't rely on outdated tactics or strategies from professors, European professors far away, but rather they wanted to know what was working on the ground. And I think that is what we want to do with publishing as well. We want to get around people and knowledge that is current. We want to have our finger on the pulse. We want to know what is working right now and not years ago. And that is why I created Driven Publishers Elite. We have multiple six-figure publishers. I'm a seven-figure publisher. I've added 3 courses. We have other six-figure publishers adding courses, adding knowledge to Driven Publishers Elite. You have weekly group calls where you can ask your questions, etc. So I highly encourage you to check it out. Thank you very much for watching. I'll keep enjoying the Andes over here, and I'll see you in the next video.